The ultimate Overwatch Season 6 tier list, including the new hero Illari, and my first impressions of her. Spoilers, I think she's kinda broken, but let's get into it. In F tier, I have Roadhog. Now, I'ma keep it real, but this guy's been F tier for the last 3 seasons, ever since he got his one-shot nerfed. He's got no utility, no mobility, basically no damage. Because he hasn't got his one-shot anymore, I just hope and pray that the Season 7 rework drastically revives Hog. Moving on to the D tier, I have Lifeweaver. He's seen quite a few buffs this season, with Tree of Life almost acting like a pseudo rally, now providing up to 100 overhealth. The spread on his Thorn Valley has been reduced, he now has a total of 225 HP, with 50 of those being shields, and he's got a nice nudge to his dash. Unfortunately, I just don't see where you'd want to pick Weaver over Kiriko, Brig, or Illari for that matter of fact. We did see a shred of Lifeweaver gameplay by the Vegas Eternal, and while it did okay, Kiriko or Illari would have done the same job, if not better. Now in the D tier, I have Pharah. The hero is still reliant on Mercy, especially at the highest levels, and you have to be a Pharah one-trick to get use out of her. Still strong if you know what you're doing, and if you can play cover really well. After Pharah, I have Junkrat's. He still struggles to get his one-shot off, and occupies quite a niche role in the game, being a counterpick to a rush team. After Junkrat, I have Bastion. Bastion got quite a few buffs this season, with the biggest one being to his tactical grenade, now dealing 130 damage in total instead of 115. He also gets some armor from transforming, and his reload time is also reduced. Still, even with these buffs, especially in coordinated play, you're never going to see Bastion unless you're running Rush and you want to run it down. You'll still have a tough time ranking up with Bastion past Master. Before I continue, I thought I'd just mention my coaching services. If you want to get a head start and the biggest update Overwatch has ever had since last year and dominate your competition, I strongly recommend you get my coaching. And don't just take my words, look at the reviews on screen. I'm also joining Uscrim as a private coach in a few days, so be on the lookout for that. Anyways, back to the tier list. Starting off in the C tier, I have Reaper. As it stands, Reaper is an easier but weaker alternative in Sombra Tracer dive comps, and is also weaker in straight up Ryan rule comps. That's not saying he's bad, but just that there's other heroes who may be better in more situations. After Reaper, I have Mercy. She received a very marginal nerf going into Season 6, with damage boost now only boosting by 25% instead of 30. This literally changes 0 meaningful breakpoints. I don't know why they did this. She is still going to be a situational pick on longer range maps with longer range comps. Next up, I have Reinhardt. The reason why Ryan isn't any higher is mainly because of his contemporaries, being Jungle Queen or Ramattra, being just better options. They have better range, Queen has a better ultimate, and they all have comparable brawl power. Not to mention, Arisa's getting buffed too, a hero that Reinhardt struggles to play into. He is still relatively situational. Zen takes up the penultimate spot in C tier. Instead of listing off the situations Zen is bad in, let me tell you where Zen's good. He's good on long range maps where you can melt down the enemy tank before they can close the distance. And that is it. We're just coming out of the Sombra Tracer, Five Nights at Freddy's jump scare meta, where Zen really sucks, but in ranked, you should still be fine for the most part. And ending off the C tier, I have Zarya. The Russian bodybuilder didn't see any changes this season, but again, we're just coming out of a dive meta, which Zarya is horrible to play into. You might say that Zarya's best matchups are getting buffed, being Orisa and D.Va, therefore you actually have a reason to play Zarya. And I'd mostly agree, but there is a lot more nuance to the Zarya D.Va matchup. Now entering the B tier, we have Widowmaker. The range nerf 2 months ago didn't impact Widowmaker as much as some thought, due to Widow still being able to one-shot while you try and get closer to her. Honestly, her biggest downside is her squishiness, and it's kinda why she gets Thanos snapped by Sombra Tracer comps. As a result, this makes her a situational pick on longer range maps, but in ranked, you can get away with running Widowmaker on more maps. Next up, I have Orisa. She's getting quite a big buff to her Fortify, giving her an additional 50 HP, and she's also getting a slight range increase. Orisa's biggest downside has always been her lack of mobility and or her range. She is getting a slight nerf again due to the armor rework, but overall, this is still a buff. She was most powerful when her fall off began at that ridiculous 25 meter mark, and you could basically one-shot heroes from across the map. Now that's no longer the case, but if you land a javelin, you are way more likely to actually get a kill from it. Next up, I have Genji. He received a really nice quality of life change a few weeks ago by increasing his clip size. Likewise to Echo, Genji is best on short to medium range maps with plenty of high ground like Ilios Lighthouse. His damage isn't as consistent as Echo, nor does he have tracer levels of mobility, but he's a sleeper pick if you know how to play him. After Genji, I have Ball. Ball's biggest counter, being Sombra, is being nerfed, and Ball's mobility is still some of the best in the game. If Sombra didn't exist, I'd honestly push him up into A tier. After Brawl, I have Torb. Torb's seen a few changes which, in short, direct its power away from his turret and into his primary fire. And honestly, you should not sleep on that fire rate change. The nerf to Torb's turret doesn't change how it's been used, and the slightly increased skill ceiling is more than welcome to help Torb players push past the lower ranks if they're good at landing their shots. Next up I have Moira. Placing Moira is always interesting because she has two completely different playstyles in ranked and in pro play. I'll keep it short and say that if you know when to duel on Moira and utilise your damage and sustain, you're going to see a lot of success. Next up I have Sigma. Sigma still pounds against Brawl comps on longer range maps, thanks to his Flux being a great kiting tool, his Accretion being a great defensive tool, and you can destroy a backline due to your high damage. He just struggles on certain maps due to the lackluster sustain and mobility. After Sigma, I have Ashe, a solid hit scan. Honestly, there isn't much to dislike about Ashe. A better hit scan in more mobile comps, but struggles when mobility is introduced. Perhaps it's not that there's anything wrong with Ashe, but just that her alternatives are just a tad bit better. After Ashe, I have Doomfist. Doom's got a pretty big buff this season, with an entire second chopped off his slam cooldown. Considering he's very reliant on his cycles to go in and out immediately, that 1 second can make a big difference. Still not great into Sombra Tracer or even into Cassidy, but he might be the sleeper tank this season. After Doom, I have Mei. A must pick in Brawl comps, okay in hybrids, and pretty underrated against dive and mobile comps. The biggest thing holding Mei back is that she can suck really badly on some maps. It's a lot easier to get good walls on Colosseo than it is on New Queen Streets, and if you're not getting wall value, then you're gonna struggle. Hanzo's up next, and likewise to Ashe, he struggles against dive when compared to his more tanky or mobile counterparts, being Sojourn, Cassidy and Torb. Hanzo is still solid in any comp because of the one-shot threat, and honestly, I think that main hit scan spot is pretty heavily contested. Solid on maps like Gibraltar and Numbani 2, where there's high ground that his other counterparts can't easily reach. Soldier takes up the penultimate spot in B tier, with his Visor receiving an ult cost increase, and his Helix Rocket buff being reverted. The thing keeping Soldier a good pick is his sprints. His ability to quickly take angles from range is almost always going to make him a great pick in solo queue. In team play, not so much though. And lastly, rounding off the B tier, I have Brigitte. She's receiving a small nerf to her shield and to her rally, but honestly, it shouldn't be that impactful. The main issues with Brig is that she's terrible into and with Brawl comps, and that dive is also being nerfed a tad bit, which is her best comp. Not to mention, in places where you're not going to get the defensive value that Brig provides, someone like Illari can come in. And speaking of Illari, she's starting off the A tier. Before you say that it's way too early to make any judgments on her, I did the exact same thing with Lifeweaver, and I was pretty much right. I have years of experience in the game, and I can generally predict what feels strong, mediocre, or weak. To help illustrate my thoughts on Illari, I have this card of her, and I want to use Kiriko as an example or a benchmark for Illari, who's another very strong support. In short, I think Illari is a higher sustain, higher damage Kiriko in exchange for lower mobility and lower utility. SK's already posted a clip of her popping off with Illari, and you can see the damage that she can deal. Illari doesn't synergize well with high mobility heroes because she just can't heal them. But everywhere else, she's pretty flexible. Poke dive, poke brawl, and full on poke comps is where I think she's going to get the most use. I'm making a full in-depth guide on Illari coming very soon, so be sure to stay tuned for that. After Illari, I have Symmetra. She received a big mid-season buff a few weeks ago where she can two-shot squishy heroes, which is even crazier considering the massive hitbox on her orbs. Obviously in Brawl Mirrors, she's pretty strong because of her level 3 beam, but it's a teleport that forms the bulk of her value. TP bombs, teleporting to off angles, combining ultimates with TP, the options are endless. Only thing holding her back is that she isn't great with or against dive. Next up I have Sombra. Yes, her EMP got nerfed, but even then, I still think she's quite impressive, especially with hack from Invis. It's unfortunate that basically nobody plays Sombra because people play Tracer instead, but if you learn Sombra, she can be very useful in both ranked and in team play. Next up is Baptiste. Obviously an all-around hero, stats and utility wise, and dishes out plenty of damage with his gun and amplification matrix. His utility is a bit lacking, and Lamp is kinda overrated, but its individual sustain isn't anything to be scoffed at. Likewise to Symmetra, he's not great with dive. Following Baptiste, I have Sojourn. A few weeks back, she got a sizable range buff, and also considering that Cass's nade, one of Sojourn's biggest counters in terms of how aggressive she can be, is getting nerfed, Sojourn deserves to hover around the high B to a low A spot. Next up is Cassidy. He's getting his dad bod back with an extra HP buff, but his maximum fall-off range is being nerfed, as well as his mag nade, with the nade detonating after 1.5 seconds of airtime. In my mind, the fall-off change doesn't really matter, because you are never getting kills as Cassidy beyond 35 meters, nor were you yeeting your nade 10 miles away and getting a kill. I'd say that this is an overall buff to an already flexible hit scan hero. After Cassidy, I have Echo. The overall buff she got to her duplicate a while back really benefited her in my opinion. She doesn't need to rely on a mercy, she has both consistent and burst damage output, and she also has a good ultimate if used correctly. She can also play against Sombra Tracer if the map has high grounds. Just don't duplicate Ryan, duplicate Ana. After Echo I have Lucio, a very flexible hero in terms of what he can do. 1 second he could be speeding your tank in, then immediately after, he could be going full Reddit mode, and then after that, he could be peeling off a dive. That's the beauty of Lucio, is the flexibility and playstyles that he has thanks to his insane mobility. Still a very good hero to rank up with. Next up I have Ramattra. Despite the Annihilation nerf, he is still the most all-around poke ball tank in the game. He's a lot more accessible than someone like Reinhardt 2, and is good in both ranked and in team play. After Lucio I have Winston. As some coaches have pointed out, it's less so that Winston is great, and more so that he synergizes really well with the best DPS around. His Primal is the best dive tank ultimate in the game, his bubble can be really oppressive, and his ability to hold space and draw attention is like no other. And lastly, finishing off A tier, I have Junker Queen. Her knife is basically like landing a hog hook, her ultimate and damage is still great, and that passive buff a while ago really helps Queen sustain. There's a reason why you're seeing her being played as an anti-dive tank at the highest levels. Now entering the S tier, the heroes that I believe to be bordering on broken. First up I have Ana. She got a small nerf to her healing, but honestly, it doesn't affect her too much. I honestly feel tired reiterating the same points with this hero, but her nade is still crazy value. It's utility that this game has never seen before, and coupled with a great ultimate, a CC ability, and high numbers all around, it's no shock that Ana is the top flex support right now, and the same can be said with Kiriko. She received what is arguably a buff this season, with Suzu dealing an additional 30 healing when cleansing a negative effect. Her kunais also got changed a bit, but long story short, this is basically a buff. None of her breakpoints change, all in favour of increasing Kiriko's consistent damage. I'm just waiting for teleport to be nerfed, because Kiriko is still crazy strong in ranked, as you can hard flank with no consequence. Please nerf the TP distance and fix the TP bugs. Next up after Kiriko is D.Va. I don't know why she got buffed, she was already a great ranked pick, and now she's even better thanks to that booster buff. Mark those off angles, go for those dives, and peel for your backline when needed. And now, in first place, I have Tracer. I'm not going to say too much because I plan to make an entire video dedicated to Tracer, and if you're a low rank player, she's still a C tierish pick if you don't know what you're doing. But in the right hands, this hero is broken. And that's it for the list. Let me know your thoughts on Illari. I will be reading the comments down below and replying to the most interesting ones, so do you think she's strong, weak, or somewhere in the middle? Shout out to my tier 2 Patreon and channel member, Broken by 50%, as well as Wix, XBenny, Susfring, Chris Jones, T-Meg, Resolucio, and Craig. Until next time.